I am nothing if not transparent with the takes that I release here on YouTube. I've had some really great takes and I've had some not so great takes. So today we're going to cover some of my best and worst takes from the 2024 fantasy football season. But first, I wanted to give a quick shout out to the guys that I just met this past week. Um, you know, I got noticed for the first time as far as people who have seen my content. It's not something that I was expecting to happen, but I really do appreciate it. It does drive me to want to make more content for you guys. Uh, so that's amazing. Shout out to you guys. You guys know who you are. Um, so without further ado, let's get right into it. All right, so up first, we have my absolutely worst take from this fantasy football season, and that's Malik Neighbors. Now, when it comes to Malik Neighbors, I was very skeptical about his success. I knew he was a freak athlete. However, he went to the Giants, and Daniel Jones was not playing particularly well, and they didn't have any viable backups to really produce, yardage and receptions in my eyes, at least from a fantasy perspective. And I was proven wrong fairly quickly. Malik Neighbors, obviously, he finished very well this fantasy football season. He was number two in targets overall, number one in target share, number two in target rate, had the fifth most air yards with the third most air yard share, had over 109 receptions for the third most in the NFL. Not quite the best mark by a rookie, but, very successful nonetheless. He had over 1,200 receiving yards, over 18 fantasy points per game. That was the fourth best mark for the wide receiver position. And he accrued almost 50% of his team's yardage and total touchdowns. That's the first place mark in the NFL by far. Um, he was number one in yards per route run. He forced the fourth most missed tackles, number two in EPA per route run, and almost 80% of his catches resulted in a first down or a touchdown. So when you think of that in terms of how many receptions total he had, at least 80 to 85 of those receptions resulted in either extending a drive or, scoring a touchdown, which is absolutely insane to me. He did this with the 39th best target quality rating for wide receivers. Only 74% of his targets were catchable. So imagine if he had a little more accurate quarterback. That could have been, Malik Neighbors going for 20 points per game on average, being the number one wide receiver in the NFL. And he did this with three starting quarterbacks. He lost Daniel Jones, early on. Tommy DeVito wasn't much better, and Drew Lock, again, not much better. He really showed out this NFL season. I'm not going to disrespect the Giants again when it comes to Malik Neighbors. Maybe everybody else on their team, but definitely not Malik Neighbors. It was my worst take by far. I can own up to that. All right, and up next we have probably my biggest dub of the season. I told you guys to go out there and draft Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry was going a little late for me. I do think that he was going to be better than, Brees Hall and Bijan Robinson. That was just, my thought process. I thought he was being disrespected a bit, especially going to the number one rush offense in the entire league. And I was proven right. Derrick Henry among running backs, fourth in fantasy overall in PPR, number two in total rushing yards with well over 2K. He was tied for first in rushing touchdowns with Jahmyr Gibbs, 16, number two in total touchdowns, 21. He had over 20 points per game, number two in explosive plays, number two in breakaway runs. He had over 6 yards per touch, number two in true yards per carry. He had the highest explosive rating of all running backs, number two in yards created, highest Pro Football Focus grade among running backs, and he did this while only playing 58% of snaps, and he only had 19 receptions. So not only was he just dominant when he was getting the ball, but he wasn't that involved in the passing game, which means that he's not going to produce as many fantasy points. And he was still number four fantasy running back despite this. So I told you guys, Derrick Henry is just one of those guys. I saw a video of him in the offseason going and, doing sprints up hills with weight. And he's just a freak of nature. He doesn't show any signs of slowing down, really, in my eyes. So, this was always going to be a successful place for Derrick Henry. He went with Lamar, uh, and you just knew that team was going to run the ball and they were going to run it down your throat. Um, I You had no reason not to believe in Derrick Henry. He didn't show you anything that said he was going to slow down. So, Derrick Henry, if you drafted him, this was a big dub for you. All right, next we have another large L for me, and that's Amari Cooper. Um, I was very disappointed in Amari Cooper's production this year. Not even, just when he went to the Bills, but he wasn't doing so great on the Browns either. And I'm not sure how much of that is him, how much of that is the Browns coaching staff, or Deshaun Watson, but he just did not look the same, which is why he wanted to leave Cleveland. And especially with Deshaun Watson getting hurt, them having, uh, they're rotating a little bit in quarterback positions. They put in Dorian Thompson Robinson, which just didn't work out too well, and Deshaun Watson was still playing like crap. You just didn't see the same Amari Cooper that went out there last year with Joe Flacco and was producing. He was originally drafted as the 54th overall player, 25th receiver, and finished number 63 for wide receivers. He only had 50 receptions. Didn't fare too much better when he was traded to Buffalo. It seemed he had potential to actually be Josh Allen's number one receiver, but they just didn't use him. He only accrued 588 total receiving yards, only, 4 touchdowns total. He averaged less than 8 points per game, 1.43 yards per route run, and only 6.3 yards per target. He was very poor in target separation. Not the Amari Cooper that we've seen that's been, productive over the last, 8-9 years. It really seemed like he fell off. And me being so high on him, expecting that because he was successful with Joe Flacco, that Cleveland was going to replicate that, just didn't work out too well. I think that he might have been more successful if he would have stayed and Jameis would have been slinging the ball. But, it just didn't work out. I was very disappointed, especially after being so high on him during the offseason. So, Amari Cooper, large L for me. We won't be making that mistake again. Amari Cooper is done for me. All right. Next up, we have a big dub for me, and that is my thoughts on CJ Stroud. You just kind of knew that, when rookie quarterbacks have a very successful season, um, they have the tendency to fall off a little bit and not replicate the success of that prior season. Hopefully, Jaden Daniels doesn't follow that same, path. But CJ Stroud, after having so much success last season, really showing that he was one of the better quarterbacks in the league, he just didn't have that same type of performance this year. He finished as the 18th quarterback, despite being number 4 in pass attempts total. He also had the 5th most danger plays in the NFL, number 6 in the most interceptable passes, 29th quarterback in fantasy points per dropback, 27th in fantasy points per game, 24th in true passer rating. He just struggled. It didn't seem like he had the same, mindset or level of play last year. Granted, it did not help that he lost both Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs for the remainder of the season, at one point, like closer to the end, and also missed Nico Collins for a couple of games in the beginning of the season. He did take the second most sacks in the entire NFL season, behind Caleb Williams, and but he was tied for the 4th most interceptions in 2024. So it's a mix of it being his problem, but also being surrounded by maybe not so successful, talent. His offensive line definitely struggled, but we did predict that, and it was a big success. If you avoided CJ Stroud, you're very happy with that. You were going to be very likely to find success with those guys that you were going to find later, like even Bo Nix. I was very happy with drafting really late. So CJ Stroud, that's a dub for us. We avoided him, and I don't think unless something drastically changes, we'll probably be looking his way in the offseason either. All right, and last but not least, we have probably my most disappointing take of this past NFL season, and that's in terms of how I actually felt like he was going to be this year, and that's Zamir White. Now, with Zamir White, it seemed like Antonio Pierce was going to give him a large amount of opportunity share, um, but it just didn't really happen. You didn't really see that even from week one, despite him being all in and benching Josh Jacobs last year. It seemed like Zamir White was set to get those 20 carries that Antonio Pierce talked about, but didn't really happen. It's not like he had somebody that they drafted or picked up in the off season that was just gonna take over that opportunity. He just never really got it. He lost his starting job by week 5, but he was already not really getting a majority of the carries. He only accrued a total of 183 rushing yards, one total touchdown, zero point 0.4 fantasy points per opportunity, minus 40 expected points added, 55 total yards created, 3.7 fantasy points per game, less than a yard created per touch. He ended the season with only 30% snap share and 40% opportunity share. The Raiders were a dumpster fire, but I expected a little bit more out of them despite expecting them to be just as bad as they were. I just thought that they would have Zamir White more involved in the game plan based off of what I saw. It didn't seem like they were getting the running backs involved much at all. And even when they were, it was usually Madison and not White, which was significantly disappointing for me. I expected a lot better things. And, I was ready to take a risk based off of where he was drafted. It's not like you wasted a crazy pick on him, but this was around the time where you had, plenty of better options. I chose him over quite a few options that were also in his area because I expected, despite his low draft ranking, that he was going to potentially be that top 24, top 20 running back, and he just wasn't. It just didn't happen. So we're going to be a lot more mindful of the situations that our running backs are in, as well as our other players, and not going to make the same mistake that we did with Zamir White next season on other players. Guys, and that's going to be it for me. If you guys like this video and you guys want to see more fantasy football content, especially with this upcoming season, and you want to see more talk about rookies and dynasty drafts and things like that, let me know in the comment section below. Once again, thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate you guys for checking me out. Having people recognize me really puts things into perspective for me, and shows me that people, do like watching the content that I make, and I just want to keep improving it for you guys. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.